Welcome to Smart Health Talk radio show, everybody. We're right here on KCAA, 1050 AM, along with 106.5 FM and Smart Health Talk radio show. I'm your host, Elaine McFadden, and I'm a registered dietitian with a master's in public health. And I have a really incredible guest for us today, Dr. Jon Lundgren, and he actually works for the USDA. And I get to get this in this time. I get to explain that he was voted by President Obama as one of our top most incredible new scientists. And we're going to talk to him about how he got that award and what that was like going to the White House and getting that from President Obama. But we're also going to talk about a lot of other interesting things like bugs. And I happen to know that we're going to be talking about bugs and how beneficial they are on our farms and our yards, and yet we're waging a war against them, and we really shouldn't be. And we're going to talk about some exciting projects that he's working on as far as like making our farms, actually showing that our farms can be even better than they've ever been, that farmers can have a great living and make money, and we can have healthier food without poison on it and more nutrition. And we're also going to be talking about some of the things he's actually done at the USDA, which they weren't too happy about, where he was actually talking the truth and trying to get the word out to people about how we're killing bees. And so this is all like fascinating stuff to me. I hope it's going to be fascinating to you too, and you're going to want to stay for the whole show because it's going to be really great. And I want to just go ahead and welcome Dr. Lundgren to our show. Welcome, Dr. Lundgren.
Thank you.
Welcome to Smart Health
Thanks
Talk.
for having me. I appreciate you taking the time out.
Well, I know we were having an earlier conversation where I was telling you about how I've actually found praying mantises. A praying mantis. I found them next to my front door as well, and I'm always excited when I find one because they're just so interesting.
Yeah, they're pretty cool.
Yeah, and so whenever I find them in my garden, and the ladybugs as well, I think I'm doing a pretty good job as a gardener because
Right.
Those
That's
are
a good sign, right?
Yeah, those are the good guys.
When you see insects in your field, that's a good thing. And this is something that a lot of people don't realize. I mean, when I tell people I'm an entomologist, a lot of times they say that the only good bug is a dead bug, right? This is not the truth. I think that yes, we have identified. I think entomologists kick around the number around 3,500 species of insects that are pests out there, right? And these things and they're important. We need to manage these pests that are out there because they're eating our food, they're destroying our homes, they're biting our children in the night. And insects have actually they've killed more soldiers than bullets or bombs.
That is amazing. That's amazing. Like we never even think about that.
Yeah, they've turned the tides of war. So very, very important. And when you start to think about it, man, that's just so many pests out there. We need to kill these things, right?
That's
if we
right.
wipe off
with Roundup even, all around our house.
No, that is not the message that I try to give to people or to farmers. And because when we have that pest-centric mentality towards bugs, and then we forget that for every one species that's out there, there's actually 1,700 species of insects that are actually helping people. These things are pollinating our food. We cannot go without pollinating insects like bees and butterflies and beetles, and continue to eat healthy. Right, very critical to our lifestyle. These are the food for wildlife. If you like to hunt or fish or bird watch, I mean these. Thank an insect, because if we don't have these insects out there, we don't have all of these other species that we need to. And they're nature's insecticides. They're predators, so they're eating the pests that are out in your field if we just get out of the way and let them do their job. Oh. And they're nature's herbicides. They're literally shaping when and where plants and weeds occur within farm fields. So,
and that's smarter, right? That's smarter farming than us thinking that we can do better than the natural rhythm of nature. Mm-hmm. So bugs are doing all these things to where we're applying all these pesticides and all these fertilizers, and you're saying that bugs just do this as part of their job for us.
Well, I think that, yes, insects and then other biodiversity that's out there. I mean, especially soil diversity is really important, soil biology. And a lot of people, when they think about soil biology, they think of soil microbes. And soil microbiology is really important, but we also need to be remembering that insects are an important part of that food web too. I think that the bottom line is that the more we look at these complex communities of organisms that even live within our farm field, we realize just how connected everything is.
That's
And that
right.
when you start tugging on little strings in that network, in that web, that you realize how it's connected to everything else and
Or
how
wipe it
important
out
that
with a
is.
pesticide.
Or you start plucking things out of that web, what happens to it? Does it start to collapse on itself? And we need to realize that we are connected to that web, and our crop is connected to that web as well. And so our decisions in terms of either increasing or decreasing diversity on our farms has implications for everything else. I mean, you have to think about it. Agroecosystems, our food production systems, currently occupies 35% of the terrestrial land surface of our planet.
It's huge. I saw this picture from space on just the human presence on this planet. And we have taken over everything practically. And then all the cutting down of the rainforests. And I have this one video on my YouTube from Dr. Jonathan Foley. You guys have the same first name.
Mm-hmm.
And
We plant.
yeah, you plan that. And he was like saying, how we have to, if we keep cutting down all these rainforests and trying to create more and more agricultural land, that we're really screwing ourselves. That instead of doing that, we need to start farming smart with all the land that we've currently, set aside for agriculture, and that we can feed even a growing population off the land that we've already designated as like agricultural land, instead of going and just keep spreading more and more, because we've lost the fertility in the
Mm-hmm.
soil. And so, let's go burn down some more rainforests instead of working that land in a sustainable way. And is that like part of the project that you guys are working on, is being able to do that kind of smart type of farming?
Yeah, we call it regenerative agriculture, where instead of trying to, it's not sustainable agriculture, because sustaining a degraded resource isn't going to get us where we
Oh
need to be.
yeah,
We
I
need
didn't
to
even
be
like think about that.
regenerating this. We need to be regenerating a lot of this, and there's tools to be able to do that. I mean,
What is
and this,
regenerating? What is your
pardon me.
definition of what's your definition of regenerating? Because maybe some people
I
aren't
think
familiar with that.
so. Soil requires certain nutrients in it in order to be productive, right? In order to be able to produce crops and animals on that land, it needs to have a certain nutrient profile. And so as we farm and we till, we lose a lot of that top organic matter, especially in that soil column. It erodes, it blows away, or it becomes destroyed by killing a lot of the biology in that soil. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to figure out, okay, what processes, what practices can farmers do that can actually help to grow the biodiversity in their farms, but also the soil organic matter, so that we can produce more food off of a smaller amount of land. It's real simple. Number
Yeah.
one, you stop tilling. We have to get to a place where there's no
And
till required.
what's tilling? What do you do
That's
when you
when you
till?
drive a tractor over and you basically break the soil up. It's there's a number of reasons why farmers have gone down that road. In large part because they think it can get them into the field earlier. It may dry out the field a little bit earlier so that they can plant their crop. It helps them stay in control, or at least they feel that way. But the reality is that when you kill one of the main outcomes of tillage is you kill the biology in your soil. And when you kill that biology in your soil, and then you come in and you plant a monoculture of a single plant species that's genetically oftentimes very limited because we've selected for crops that are produce large seeds at the expense of many other traits in that plant. When you do that, when you till the soil, kill the biology, and then you plant a monoculture, guess what the first thing to colonize that field is? It's the primary pest. And you've just eliminated a lot of the biology that's there normally to resist the proliferation. So you go down this road, right? We
That
go to,
seems like a really stupid way of farming to me.
well,
But you see,
there's an education issue there, isn't there?
yeah.
Because I think the science is pretty strong on a lot of these ideas, but it's not being communicated to the farmer in a way that they can so in a way that they can easily adapt onto their operation.
And really,
Where, I
the
mean, when
people
we're
in,
talking about, oh, encourage biodiversity, I mean, that's great. It sounds wonderful, but what do I do? What do I plant? You want me to plant something? What is that? Or
yeah,
what is it that yeah. So we
education.
need to
So
be, as
education of our farmers.
scientists, pardon me,
So education of our farmers is really
I think
key
that's
because I feel like from what you're saying that I think back on companies, the big companies, the pesticide companies, the seed companies like Monsanto and that they're kind of the ones in control of the education right now, that they're telling farmers that, oh, you need to farm this way, and that somewhere during the line here we lost that knowledge of how farmers used to farm, which was probably more like what you're talking about. And
Mhm.
so we have to kind of go back and relearn these other principles of farming. And that's kind of like what you guys are doing, are applying these other principles that maybe were used like many years ago
Mhm.
and kind of go back to that.
Right. So I think that there was a baseline knowledge of practices that seem to be working in the pre-industrialized agricultural system, right?
Oh, okay.
But I think that we've also learned a heck of a lot about applied ecology, where we now understand some of those processes better so that we can more easily adapt these things onto operating farms. So it becomes very clear you can't till, you can't leave bare soil. It really helps to integrate animals into your cropping operations. We need perennial and annual cropping systems within a single operation. And it sounds, I mean, these are the elements that you're playing around with. And so philosophically and sort of conceptually, we know what needs to happen. But then each region, each area of the country has its own constraints and circumstances. Maybe it's a little bit warmer there, or they have more moisture, or they have certain pest complexes that aren't present at the other places in the country. And so you do have to adapt your system using the tools that are available, but keeping in mind, okay, tillage, reducing tillage, never leaving bare soil, always having plant matter and biodiversity on your farm, having multiple revenue streams coming into your farm so that if crop prices go haywire one year, you're not left out in the dust, right?
Oh, yeah, that's really smart. I like that.
There's not an economist in the world that says, hey, we should put all of our eggs in one basket. That just makes good financial sense. But agriculturally, that's really what we're doing right now. I mean, 5% of the country's land area is devoted to corn. Corn, one plant species. One plant species where once there was thousands of plant species. And the only way that it's maintained is with fertilizer inputs, with genetically modified, with neonictonoid seed treatments, which is an insecticide, fungicides, herbicides. That's the only way that we can maintain such a simplified, degraded system.
Well, that alone sounds like there's a weakness in it because if you're so dependent on these other inputs, and I've had a guest that told us that like the phosphorus that you have to add to get the soil to feed the plant, that we're taking it from a mine and bringing it in, and that we only have like so much on the planet, and then we're not
The,
going to
o-
have any more.
the oil and gas crisis is nothing compared to the phosphorus crisis. It's going to happen within the next, a couple of decades by all projections. What's so is that we'll run out of phosphorus. And when we run out of phosphorus, then how are we going to fertilize our crops within this current system? But what's so fascinating is that most of the phosphorus that we're putting out there right now isn't even used by the plants because it's not bioavailable. It's not in a form, in a package
Really?
that the plant can even use. You know what needs to be
Oh
in
my
the soil
gosh.
in order for the plant to use it? Biodiversity, soil microbes that can take that phosphorus and actually feed the plants with the phosphorus that's already in most soils. But because we've killed off a lot of our microbiology in our soils, we're left with this situation where we have to replace biodiversity with technology.
Well, when you talk about not leaving the soil bare, and you were talking about like planting different like legumes and other cover crops. So, like, why is that so important? When you leave the soil bare, like, what happens to the soil then?
Right. Well, if there's not living plant material, I mean, that's how the energy gets into the system, right? Is through plants from the sun. The sun is the power source for a natural system. So when you remove plants from that system and leave just bare soil, where's the energy that's coming into that system?
Because the plants are kind of like the transfer mechanism of the
hmm
energy from the sun into the soil. I never really
Yep,
thought about it like that. That's so
that's
cool.
right.
I love.
Yeah,
God, it's
yeah.
such a great system. And so, and then what about like does the soil like blow away when
Yes,
there's no plants
absolutely it
on
does.
it?
Yeah, or it runs away with water when there's a rainfall event. If the soil isn't covered, man, if you ever have the opportunity to go online and watch a rainfall simulator or something like this, you can see the rain it just pounds that soil so hard if there's not a cover on it. So the plants are the skin of that soil and it protects the soil. It allows the soil to retain water when it needs to, but also it allows it to retain a lot of life. And that life, like in terms of insects or microbes or fungi, all of these, this biodiversity, animals, plants, microbes, all working together. When you have that system out there in your soil, then you don't need a lot of chemical fertilizers anymore.
And then what about like okay, so if the soil does blow away, like that soil that's blowing away, is that like a different type of soil than because soil has layers, right?
Mhm.
And is that topsoil like how valuable is that topsoil?
That topsoil is the most valuable thing that's money that's blowing out of a farmer's field.
Oh, really? That's how
So if
you
it's
look at it.
not, yeah, I mean that is what it is it's money, and farmers need to realize that. And the way that it blows away is by tillage and disturbing that soil and not keeping it covered.
And are you
Uh,
cutting the earthworms in half too when you do that? I always
no,
wondered about that when the tractor comes along. Is it like chopping up the earthworms that are in there if they're lucky enough to have any? Because probably, I've always had this picture that when you put all these pesticides on the soil that and killing the microorganisms, that it's like a death of a city almost, the little city that like lives in the soil.
mhm.
And and I think that that's actually kind of sad. I want soil that has life, because to me as a dietitian, when you have soil that has life, it adds more life to the plant. It adds more nutrition into the fruit or vegetable. And we didn't really have a lot of proof about that until Dr. Charles Benbrook, who's been a guest on our show, did research when he was at the Organic Trade Association. And that was so exciting when he actually was able to prove, oh, organic, produce
Mm.
has more nutrition. Or like, oh yeah, like logically, you would think that. But as a dietitian, it was so frustrating when I'd have these people saying, oh, conventional and organic, the nutrition is all the same, all the same. And I'm just like, do you even like think logically? Because how could that even mathematically be possible when you look at the microbes? And like, if we went down in there and looked at into the soil, like what kind of things would we see was going on in there? Because there's like, probably like trillions of microorganisms in there, just like more than we could even imagine.
Right, 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 right. Oh, yeah. Just for bugs, and I know the insect world even better than the microbial world, but if you walk across, I believe we calculated it was around 4 acres or something like that of a sunflower field. You walk across more insects than there are humans on the face of the earth in that little
Really?
patch
That's
of
mind
farm
blowing.
field. You know, I mean,
Wow.
that's a lot of biology. That's a
And
lot of
just like
biology.
4 acres. So, like, I'm just curious, as a little boy, were you like into bugs as a little boy? Because we could inspire maybe some future etymology scientists out
Yeah.
there. Because you're kind of a cool, guy that I would think kids could aspire to be like. And so, were you like, did your mom just go? Did you drive your mom crazy by collecting bugs and bringing them in the house?
I I loved all animals. I mean, I was just an animal nut when I was growing up, and I knew I wanted to be a biologist, but I didn't know that I wanted to do entomology until I took a class in college, and I realized, wow, I can study animals and make money at the same time. This sounds like a great sounds like a great career. So it really, yep, power of certain teachers in your lives. Isn't that a true
Oh
statement?
yeah, they are definitely inspirational, just as scientists like you, because we need more scientists, and you have you put a lot of things before. Well, to me, it seems like you put people and the truth and looking towards the future of our food supply, of our planet, of our environment. It's from some of the actions that you've taken. To me, those are all part of the person that you are, because you've been very brave in kind of speaking out on things that you learned along the way and you felt that people should know. And why don't you
Right.
tell us about that experience? Because to me, that must have been kind of tough, because I've worked for the government before myself, and there could be like a lot of pressure from higher ups in your job, and I felt like you kind of went through that personally, and I was just wondering if you could tell us about how your experience came about, where you when you had this awakening of you know, kind of, oh my gosh, you start like coming to this realization of things that were happening that weren't good. And
Right.
what made you decide to take action on that, and then the repercussions of that action?
So I'm of the mind that scientists need to be philosophers before they become researchers, and so we really are driven by a belief system, right? Just like everybody else is. Except scientists approach it by then we use that belief system to shape which questions that we're asking. And then we allow the data to determine whether or not, we're correct or whether we're wrong. And it allows us to gather information and trying to seek the truth, right? And so there was two aspects of my research program. One is developing sustainable solutions for food production and pest management specifically based on biology. And then the other aspect of my research program is risk assessment and trying to understand the implications of pesticides for the environment, especially what we call non-target species, which are those friendlies that we're not trying to kill with pesticides, but that sometimes fall by the wayside as collateral damage. And so, particularly, I've been really interested in risk assessment procedures for genetically modified crops and making sure that these things are safe. And then also for pesticide use. And so especially things like neonicotinoid seed treatments.
Yeah, what does
This
that
word,
mean? Because
yeah,
it sounds like cigarettes to me. It sounds like,
right.
nicotine. Like I feel the word nicotine is in there, and I'm just
Yeah,
wondering, like, is there
it is.
nicotine?
It's a nicotine-based insecticide. And then what happens is that we're coating this onto most of our crop seeds right now. It's planted on, I believe, about 13% of the land surface of our country is coated in neonicotinoid seed
So that when you
treatments.
look at the seed before you plant it in the ground, it has a coating, a poison
Yep.
on it. Oh, okay.
If it, and then what happens is that the developing plant takes that insecticide up, and so it defends the plant from herbivory that might happen early on. But as that plant develops, the neonicotinoid starts to dissipate from the plant, and so it's at low levels supposedly by the time that flowering happens, for example. But what's insidious about it is that only 2 to 20% of the chemical is taken up by the crop plant. The other 80 to 98% of that chemical is 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 either left in the soil, but we're finding it in the waterways. We're finding it into untreated plants, things like milkweed plants that we're trying to plant for monarchs. We're finding it on our organic farms now. So we're actually finding that when we plant conservation strips on organic farms that have never seen insecticidal seed treatment, that these farms are turning up hot for neonicotinoids. But we don't understand fully how it's getting through the environment and what the ecological pathways are whereby this pesticide that's supposed to be just on the seed is getting everywhere else in the environment. Because we know that it's a neurotoxin, right? It affects the nervous system of insects.
And what
That's
about
how it
us? What
kills.
about us? Is it affecting
One
our nervous
seed,
system?
one I believe there's been a study that's shown that approximately one treated seed is enough to kill a sage grouse, for example. And we're actually seeing there's
What
been
is that?
research
What is
that's
a sage grouse?
it's like think of a pheasant, a small pheasant. And so we're starting to see pheasant declines. We're starting to see farmland birds in decline, and it's directly related to neonicotinoid use. The correlations were very, very strong in one study that was
I
published
didn't think
recently.
about it killing like birds too. Oh no, that's terrible.
We're we're finding it in deer livers. We just finished that study, and hopefully that work will be starting to come out soon. Um, so yeah, it's not staying put. And the other part of that equation that's a little disturbing and is that the farmers don't necessarily really need this. It's not improving their yields.
Mm.
It's not controlling pests within their fields. And we've done this in soybeans, we've done it in sunflowers, corn as well. And the data is very consistent that the neonicotinoid seed treatments, farmers are being charged for this $10 to $15 an acre, but it's not improving their profitability.
And
And so,
instead, it could be improving, their bottom line and how much money they get to profit from.
exactly. One farmer down in Kansas told me, I listened to you, Jon, when you were talking to us, and you said don't put seed treatments on your soybeans this year. So I listened to you. I said, okay, how'd
Oh
it go?
yeah.
He's like, well, he's like, well, I had a lot of army worms this year. I'm like, really? Ooh, how's your beans look now? And he said, well, the beans look real good. You saved me $10,000 this year.
Yeah.
One farmer, just by abandoning this unused seed treatment.
So wow, that must have really made you feel great.
Yeah, that really made me feel good. And there's been more and more reports of that. It's like, wow, because the farmers don't. First off, a lot of times they don't have a choice. They have to buy the bag with the seed or with the seed treatment on it because there really isn't any other options. But so I started talking to farmers about this, and people started listening. And then the press started getting interested. We found that these neonicotinoid seed treatments were getting into milkweed plants, and it's the sole source of food for the monarch butterfly. And we're seeing steep declines in monarchs right now. And a lot of that was thought to be because of the habitat reductions. As we grow more corn, for example, we take out habitat out that used to be good habitat for milkweed. But what our study really suggested is that the remaining milkweed, because there was a lot of milkweed that didn't have monarchs on it. I'm like, where's all the monarchs if we've got all this milkweed out there? And when we tested it, more than half of the plants were testing positive for clothianidin, which is one of the neonictonoid seed treatments. And this is highly toxic. At 1 part per billion, we were finding sublethal
Oh, those
effects with
poor
monarchs.
monarchs, they come on the plant, and then because they came to that plant, they got killed.
Right. And so we tried to publish that study. I went through all of the approval process, and we got it, and I submitted it to the journal, and it was accepted, and then it got press. And USDA was really not pleased with that, and so they started to slap me around, and I don't know, between all of the suspensions and all of it's a long story, but essentially, they decided that this was not convenient research, that this was not something that should be publicized, and so
I'm ashamed that we have a USDA that thinks like that. I want to be a proud American. I get ashamed when I think about how our politicians are out there, pressuring other countries to use GMOs to help, in favor of companies like Monsanto instead of caring about all the things that we've been talking about today.
I think it subverts the scientific process, and that's a big problem. Okay, it's essentially limiting it's essentially analogous to limiting the freedom of speech, right? By telling people that they can't talk
Which
about
is our Constitution.
Well, it is.
It's what our country's supposed to be about.
So the scientific process, I mean, even if, and the study was very strong, right? And the study was done correctly. But even if it wasn't, you publish these things, it undergoes a peer-reviewed process. Other scientists are able to weigh in and say whether or not it's rigorous or not. And if the ideas are in that are questionable, then somebody else is then able to use that as a baseline for conducting additional work to either prove or disprove under different circumstances whether or not this was an accurate perception. But when you stop it from even reaching the publication process like this, then to me that's yeah. I mean, how can we move forward as a society if our scientists aren't able to discuss things, critical aspects,
and that's
just because they're politically disfavored? That dialogue that happens, that give and take, and that growth is a very healthy thing from a scientific perspective. And so, yes, we need to allow that to happen for our federal scientists, and that's why I blew the whistle. And so
you whistleblower, you.
Yes. So we said that what was going on within the USDA, this is not okay, and so we filed an official complaint with the Merit Systems Protection Board, which is essentially
and you had
the
the Public Employees for Environmental Responsibility, the peer group, helping you.
It's a big shout out to Peer, if those and they are always looking for support. So please consider that, because Peer, if they hadn't been there, I wouldn't probably have a job right now. And then so many of our planet's problems that we're facing right now are tied to how we're producing food, and that comes down to the simplification of our food production systems. We have 160 million acres of corn and soybeans. And I don't think that there's anything wrong inherently with corn or soybeans, but when you have that proportion of your food production system in two places, and it's supporting the whole current paradigm is just bent on supporting those two things. When's the last time you went and had grabbed out of the grain bin a handful of yellow number 5 corn, Nobody, we eat 8% of the corn crop and we eat 2% of the soybean crop. where is all of that area that we could be growing food going to? Eventually, it'd be nice to get into cellulosic-based ethanol production. But when I questioned that, me and an economist friend, we did some economic modeling in order to try to understand how we got into this situation where we're really investing a lot of our food production dollars into a very limited amount of crops, especially corn. And so the data was very strong that our policies were influencing that and driving a corn-dominated agricultural system, and that ethanol was having unintended consequences on the environment and on grain markets and farm profitability as well. The USDA made me take my name off of that paper. They said I couldn't be a part of it because it may question policies. It's like, man, if science is being done right, every single paper should be questioning policies or have policy implications, right?
That is huge.
Uh,
That's such an important statement, Dr. Lundgren. It really is. You know,
you want to know where the 8% of the corn crop is that we eat? It's in corn syrup and in Cheetos, I think. We process the living heck out of that.
well, and the sugar beets too. You know, people think, oh, they come up with these commercials. Oh, now we're taking the high fructose corn syrup out of your soda and we're putting sugar in there. Okay, and they're picturing Hawaii, you know, and this sugar cane, you know, is now in their soda, when that's the farthest from the truth, because almost all of the sugar beets are GMOs as well. And even one of our guests, Dr. Stephanie Seneff, said that they spray Roundup on the sugar cane before they harvest it for the desiccation.
If people could see, I lived in the country Colombia for 4 months. If people could see what they do to produce sugar cane, they wouldn't be eating as much sugar. Let's put it that way. But there is a better way, and that is what I'm going to devote the rest of my life to. And I think that what in observing how to produce food in a way that's healthier, so that you're producing more nutrient-dense food and in a safe way for the environment, I came to quickly realize that the farmers were by far leading the science. And you were kind of indicating this earlier when you were talking about one of the topics that we were talking about earlier, where it's like sometimes the science is actually used as a hindrance for the innovation of agriculture, where if a scientist can't reproduce what's being done, then they on an actual farm, then the data isn't able to be used by policymakers and everybody else in terms of innovating food production. So it was, for example, and I'm saying this poorly, but maybe an example may help to illustrate it. In the panhandle of Nebraska, there's interest in using cover crops, right? And integrating cover crops instead of leaving wheat fallow, where you have bare soil out there. And the research scientists tried to integrate cover crops on their research farm, and they couldn't get it to happen. And so the risk management agency, which is farm insurance, says, okay, well then we're not going to insure farmers that are trying to use cover crops. And then I drive out there, and there's guys that have eliminated their fallow period. They're using cover crops on their operations. But it's like, the science is saying that it can't happen. But I'm like, here it is, you guys. This can happen. It is happening. Why isn't that we can't use our policies and our science in order to help innovate rather than just simply support the current paradigm that's going on?
Yeah, that the insurance companies, you know, when it's such a better system, it's making the soil healthier and therefore less chance of losing your crop because you have a healthier plant that might actually do better even if there was a drought or, you know, some other weather event that made it more stressful for the plant to survive. And yet, you know, they're like not even like thinking of that in the whole context of this is a better system for me too,
Right.
You know, that they benefit.
We need a transformational change in how we're producing food. And historically, transformational changes of the kind that we need do not come from the government. They don't come from universities. Where these changes come from is from the bottom up. And just like I said, so the farmers are the ones who are going to be making, and the consumers and the dietitians are going to be the ones who are making this change happen. And so what we're going to do is we're establishing a national network um, of research, education, and demonstration farms to illustrate to farmers and the community how we can be using some of these regenerative practices on farms. It's called Blue Dasher Farm. It's going to be we're starting up in South Dakota here, just about 20 minutes north of Brookings, where I live right now. And we're going to be pairing cutting edge science in order to help bridge that gap between the science and actual applied aspects of the science so that farmers can use that science to help innovate their operations. We're going to be training the next generation of scientists and farmers
Yes.
in terms of what regenerative agriculture is.
I love it. That's so great.
And then we're going to be putting our money where our mouth is. We're saying, you know what? We are going to tie our livelihoods to the success or failure of this demonstration farm. And so we are walking in the shoes rather than simply working on research farms. We are actually going to be working on operating farms in order to demonstrate how this, I mean, imagine these centers for excellence in agroecology, where we pair the top agroecologists with the most innovative producers, and then we start planting these seeds all over the country, where we can start to use farmers as our tools for disseminating correct information about how to farm more ecologically based. I'm really excited about it.
Well, yeah, go ahead. Tell me.
We've just had such an upwelling of support because, and the beekeepers, the farmers, the ranchers. I mean, you want to solve the bee people problem in this country? Heal the soil. Step one. Heal the soil, and you're not going to have a bee problem anymore. It provides habitat for the bees. It reduces the stress on the bees because they're eating more healthy, just like humans. And it's reducing pesticide exposures that are associated with conventional farming operations. So the beekeepers are like, this is the answer. This is what we've been looking for. The innovative farmers that are leading the charge, but are kind of alone in terms of their scientific needs and support, are going to finally have an infrastructure there for them to try to. And we're doing it privately because I'm not convinced that we can run independent research through large research institutions reliably.
Well, that's
what
not to
we're
say
independent
that there isn't
too. Good science.
We're independent radio show as well. That we have no influences.
I think it lends a lot to the credibility of what's going on. Not that there isn't good science that's happening at the USDA. There is, but it's not complete. There are questions that we cannot address, and that's because of political interference. At such an exciting time in history right now, because through crowdfunding and things like this, we can actually, the people, through a very simple action, can help support certain questions and certain science that they want to see done. And so that's the other aspect of this whole model is we have an Indiegogo site, and we're going to allow the farmers and the beekeepers and the consumers the ability to say, hey, we believe that this is the way to go, and so we're going to contribute.
And this is all under Blue Dasher, right? Blue Dasher Farm?
Yes, bluedasher.farm, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so anyone can find this, and
it's all online now.
I mean, what a great way to spend your money. If you want to do something with your money to make the world a better place, giving it to your group, to me, is one of the best investments anyone could ever make. And then, like, years from now, you could look and to see how the fruit of your effort and how it's inspired a whole different system of farming and providing us food.
I believe that this is a really strong answer to moving forward. And the question that I ask farmers at the end when I'm presenting my research to them or talking about science and what's going on you may be making money doing things the way you're doing right now. You may make it next year, but what's your soil going to look like in 20 years? What are you leaving behind for the next generation?
That's so important.
I think that legacy, we are all we are history will remember whether we did things correctly or not. And I think that we really have a responsibility to the legacy that we're leaving behind. And so that's why I'm going this new direction with my family and my research team, and we're gonna
And
start doing things
well,
a little
as
bit differently.
consumers, we get
Oh
to
yeah,
contribute too, by buying products that come from
yep.
farms that are
That's so important, isn't it? That's so important. It comes down to, I mean, if there's a demand for a particular, practice in terms of producing food, if there's a demand from the consumer, then farmers are going to do it more readily, right?
Oh,
Uh,
absolutely. That is
and
like
so,
one of the most powerful things. So, as consumers, with our dollars, and like we benefit because we get food that like tastes better. It's not full of pesticide. We're not putting our children at risk because pesticides are the number one cause of birth defects. And that is like so upsetting to me. It's like, why are we risking the health of our babies when we don't have to? And that's what you're saying is we don't even have to, put our families, our children, our country through this risk because we can do it without it. We don't need
there's a
that.
better way. There's a better way, and we're
And
going
you're
to
going to
try to
find it.
educate.
And I can see why President Obama like chose you, Dr. Lundgren, as one of our top scientists, that new scientists out there. And like that must have been a pretty exciting time to be
I
honored like that.
I didn't think I would be starstruck, but it was really neat to be in the White House and to get to shake the president's hand. I mean, he was like walking down the hallway towards me and some other scientists that won this award. And yeah, it was pretty neat.
No, I am. They were right on picking you. I'm telling you, they were so right on. And sometimes I've been through some really hard things in my life too, that seem challenging and stressful. And you're just kind of like, why me? Why is this happening to me? But sometimes that can lead you down a path
I,
that takes you to your true purpose.
Sometimes things happen for a reason, don't they? Right. It made me focus on what was important, and it really made me rethink how it is that I even conduct science. When I thought that I really had a good picture on that, now I'm much more receptive to listening. Some of the best natural historians on the planet are the beekeepers and the farmers because they're out there and they're watching things happen on their fields. And that's the way science used to happen. People used to observe, and then they used to use those observations to generate hypotheses that then they could test. And we've really disconnected a lot of our scientific, capacity away from the natural world where we used to observe things happening, and that used to shape things. How
Observational
with
studies are my favorite kind because you get to be
I
like
think,
kind of a people watcher or a insect watcher.
mm,
But and like I just we're probably running out of time here, but wanted to ask you like how, because some people may say, oh, that can't be done, we can't transition to this. And I know there are challenges because like Monsanto controls so much of the seeds that are actually sold to farmers. They kind of like have like taken up the whole market. We need
right.
seeds to sell to these farmers that don't have the pesticides coated on the outside of them and that. And I mean, how do you feel about the possibility? Do we have hope that we could do this?
Yes. I mean, the question isn't whether or not we can, grow food and preserve the environment. The question is going to be what's going to happen to us if we don't. And I don't need a crystal ball to see the future of farming because there are farmers that are already doing this stuff and they're very profitable. And so I can go and see things that are happening. That's what I want Blue Dasher Farm to be is a place where people that are interested, when they're ready to start making that change, they can go and they can see what's happening and how to integrate that into their own operation. That's a very powerful tool.
And then just let's kind of end on a very hopeful note, because you were telling me about some research that some other farmers were doing with grazing. Because we know that a report I just read today from NASA is, we're up close to 400 parts per million carbon in the air, highest in millions of years. It's like, catastrophic weather events could happen at any moment when we're playing around with these type of carbon levels in our air, and everyone's trying to find ways to reduce carbon. But you actually know some people that know how to reduce carbon very, very
Right.
efficiently. And
I
why
mean,
do you share that with what they're doing?
35% of our planet's land surface is devoted to agriculture. And so, if we're going to solve a lot of these problems that the planet is facing, then it really has to involve agroecosystems as one of the focal places where this is going to happen. And we can do that. We can reduce pollution. We can improve human nutrition. We can even offset carbon and climate change using our food production systems. So one great example is working with Peter Bick at Arizona State University. He's the guy. He's a filmmaker, and he made the Carbon Nation movie, if you guys know that. And he's working on a new project called Soil Carbon Cowboys, and he's got a great Vimeo. If you go online, it's really inspiring. But what we're finding, he's pulled together a great team of scientists from all over the country, and we are going to be looking at how to manage herds of cows in ways where we can regenerate a lot of the pasture land. And when you allow, or through multi-paddock, high intensity grazing, where you move cows, you keep them close together, they eat a lot of the grass and all the plants in an area, and then you move them frequently. You can actually, and then allow that grass or that pasture to recover, and the prairie comes back and the grasslands come back, and with gusto, right? Because this mimics what used to happen in natural systems with the large herds of bison used to come through grasslands and prairie areas. We found that if we devoted 20%, that, and it produces healthier beef because you're not relying on
GMO
um,
corn.
yes, exactly. So what happens is that we can actually, if we've devoted 20% of the rangeland in this country, where our calculations are that we could probably offset most of our carbon emissions in this country. That's using agriculture as a solution rather than as a problem. And that's just one example that we're going to be investigating more and more often on Blue Dasher Farm. So this is really exciting time for us.
Well, I just want to add that actually went up to Organic Pastures, is the largest raw milk producer in California. And I went up and interviewed Mr. McAfee right up on the farm. And what I saw was exactly what you were talking about. I
Isn't that something?
yeah, I
It's
saw.
inspiring.
It was.
It's
He
inspiring.
just had this one wire that was an electrical wire around, and all the cows were in, and there was
Yeah,
grass everywhere, but they were in one area, and they would eat the grass there that day, and then the next day they just moved the wire over
yeah,
to another place, and they just ate in another place. And I thought,
yeah.
wow, this is like the way milk should be made. The cows eat grass, and then they supplement with a few grains, and that's it. You know,
Millions of years went into producing that cow to be a really efficient consumer of grass and
I,
other
I
plants.
I absolutely loved it, and so I just want to thank you so much for being our guest today.
Oh,
And
dude, that was a lot of fun.
your work is, like, to me, one of the most important things that we could be doing to ensure a safe, affordable, and nutritious food system. And like you said, we need to be thinking about our children, our children's children, what kind of world are we leaving for them. And dead soil that can't produce crops or has a reduced capacity for yield production, to me, is not a very nice gift to be leaving them. And so I just
We
want to
can do
thank you.
better. We can do better.
Well, you're definitely, like I said, you're a hero in my book, and I'm going to be keeping track of you. And we want you to come back and give us some reports on Blue
Oh, I'd love.
Dasher Farm,
Yeah.
and I hope we get lots and lots of people to fund you, because this is like such a great way to do something good for our country too. So thanks
Thank you
again.
so much.